All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dominic Giardino, and I'm the chair of the Emerging Professional Leadership Council here at Early Music America. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first Early Music Month social. And we're hoping that this type of event can continue throughout the months, and we can continue to invite people into as intimate a space as Zoom allows us to interact with some really phenomenal people in the field. So of course, today we're joined by some very special guests that I will let my colleague Julia introduce. But I do want to let you know that throughout this discussion, throughout this talk, if you have questions that come to mind, please throw those in the chat. We will have a Q&A at the end of this event, and we're hoping to get to as many questions as humanly possible. So as soon as something pops into mind, throw it in the chat and we will dock it. But with that, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Julia, who's actually this has been her brainchild, and it's been amazing to see it all come together. So Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dominic. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Julia Bengtsson, and I'm a dancer and choreographer based in New York. I grew up in Gothenburg, Sweden, and seeing Baroque opera, a mix of singing, dancing, music, and drama, just blew my mind as a child. And this fusion of the arts became my ideal when I started choreographing my own works in my teens. I graduated from Royal Swedish Ballet School and I moved to New York, and there I met Catherine Torosi. I'm currently a dancer with her company, New York Baroque Dance Company. And last year I joined EMA's Emerging Professional Leadership Council, which provides aspiring leaders with opportunities to grow and learn from working alongside experienced professionals within EMA. I am honored to be facilitating this panel discussion featuring three extraordinary leaders of our field: David McCormick, Catherine Turocy, and Byron Schenkman. And first I'll introduce David McCormick. David, you have led numerous music organizations from Shenandoah Ballet Bach Festival and Charlottesville Chamber Music Festival to Early Music Access Project. You are a founding member of Alkemie, and most recently in 2021, you were named the Executive Director of Early Music America. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how being an Executive Director of an organization is different from being an artistic director. What joys do you find in those different positions? And perhaps you can speak a little bit about the challenges too.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me for this. This is really wonderful to see this come to fruition. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly, they're two different brains at work here, and they complement one another, but they're sometimes a little bit at war with one another as well. You know, there's the artist brain who, you know, where I'm like, I need like several hours to think over a thing and figure out like what order the program will be in and that kind of thing. And then there's the executive director brain where I have to, you know, I'm doing like a new task every 5 minutes and like thinking really critically about things. And sometimes that's really good. So I think it's really nice, like with EMA, to have that artist brain. To be thinking about all these different things that EMA does, and being an artist helps me know what other artists need from EMA. So that's been really helpful. Although sometimes I get stuck in artist brain rabbit holes on EMA problems where I have to just remember to be an executive director and just think about the problem and find a solution. But I really enjoy it. I may be one of the few artists who actually likes this work, who likes being an executive director. I find it a really exciting challenge to figure out how to get people at concerts, how to raise enough money to have those concerts, all of that. And I learned that kind of early on by accident. I had started a group called Three Notched Road in Charlottesville, and we needed to figure out how to get some people at our very first concert. And so I just started asking around. You know, I went to a couple of other executive directors in town and I said, how do you do it? How do you raise enough money to have even one concert with 5 people in it?
What did they answer?
I still don't know the answer. No, but it's I've learned a lot over the years, and I've tried all sorts of different ways of doing it. And it's really interesting now to be in a national position. I feel like everything I learned about local fundraising and local getting butts in seats just doesn't apply at the national level. And so I'm relearning some skills, especially when it comes to raising money.
This is fascinating to hear. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you pointed out, you've been a leader from very early on in your career. And throughout your career, you have shown how important inclusivity is. It's been a key word throughout. And why is inclusivity so important to you? And how does that manifest itself in your leadership?
That's a good question. I mean, this really, it's always been important to me, but it really became a focus for me when I started my research for early music access project into the music at Monticello. And I realized that really the most important story was the story of the enslaved musicians at Monticello. That, tons of people have, well, not tons, but many people have written articles about the music that Jefferson collected, and that there's an interesting story there. But it was just so much more important to me to tell the story that was being ignored, which was that Jefferson's enslaved sons were fiddlers and their cousins were fiddlers, and they played for Lafayette's visit to Charlottesville. I mean, there are all of these milestone, extremely important moments in local history and national history that had kind of been lost to us. We don't really hear about them. And so it became important to tell those stories. And then immediately I realized that I can't tell those stories without Black participation. And I didn't want to just invite Black artists to perform with me. That didn't feel like the right way to do it. And so they became collaborators. So for instance, the concert that I just finished doing, Sacred Music of Monticello, some of those artists have been chatting with me for 2 years now about this project and giving me their knowledge, their input. James Dargan wrote music for the concert after a lot of back and forth about what that might look like. And that just, it felt a lot better. And it actually taught me a little bit about how maybe we could move forward with all sorts of collaborations, that all of them could be deeper, that we don't always just have to invite folks to come play with us and not really think about exactly how we're working with them and what their leadership role can be.
That is really inspiring. Yeah, I'm all for collaboration. So next I'll introduce Catherine Turosi. Catherine, you have stage directed and choreographed over 70 Baroque operas. You were decorated by the French Republic as a Chevalier in the Order of Arts and Letters. You've won Bessie Awards as well as an Izzy Award. And you founded New York Baroque Dance Company together with Anne Jacobi in 1976. You have run your dance company for over 45 years. There are not very many people who can say that they have led an arts organization for that long. Do you have any advice for artists with a vision to start their own arts organization? That might be different in music or in dance. You can answer this any way you would like to.
I think there's a big difference in music and dance, and also there's a big difference from starting something up in 1976 and starting something up in 2022. I think my advice would be to look at David McCormick and look at the kind of collaboration that he was just talking about, which is that when you want to be inclusive, instead of just inviting someone from another culture to perform, give them more responsibility in terms of forming what that project is, in terms of forming how it's put together. And I think that if for somebody wanting to start an organization, it's important to understand that it's not about you. It's not about the two people maybe that want to start an organization. It's about the community. It's about what the community needs. Do they need another early music group that specializes in medieval music without making a connection to our contemporary times. And uh, I think that's maybe really the question is, which is that because of the way education is, and because of the way our society is, that we really need to be looking at how we interact not only with with the groups in our community, but also with that recognition that our music is, our dance is really in the distant past. And I've been doing some collaborations with Marcia Dater. She's an African American dancer and specializes in Caribbean, Haitian dance. And we've been working together since 2003. And so what we used to say, like, this is where like the contra dances started in Europe, and this is where they ended up today. But now we're going from today and then going back. So I think if you're starting a new group, that you have to think of today, and then you have to think of what is it about your passion that's going to you light the fire under other people, the audience, participants, young people. You can't think of like how am I going to perfect my demi coupe as much as how am I going to make my demi coupe meaningful.
Wow. Yeah. And you have certainly done exactly that. I have to tell everyone who is here today that this event is much inspired by you, Catherine, and your work in the past 2 years. When the world shut down in 2020, you were only weeks away from your production of the opera Scylla and Glaucus at Versailles in France, and this month-long tour was canceled. I know you've been working on this production for over 3 years. That is correct, right? Yes.
Correct, yeah.
And then yet in March, while faced with this horrible disappointment, you seized a moment when the world seemed to be standing still, and you created something entirely new. You created virtual platforms for early dance classes, lectures, and other events that supported your dancers financially and creatively. And many of these presentations and classes were free and suggested donation, open to the public. So you also supported your community during this time when you were also vulnerable. And you were collaborating with important researchers in Europe. I would like to ask you, Catherine, how were you able to transform that major disappointment to creating creative ways to care for your dancers and your community?
Oh, well, I think the first thing is to just go ahead and cry. And then after that, it's like, okay, so what? Everybody has a problem, and my problems are not that bad. And then you start looking at, what is needed and what you can do from where you are. What is the communal power that can be there? And I think that, especially with Caroline Copeland, and also with Sarah Edgar, and Jennifer Meller, we were talking about, what we could do with our art and how I think people were so demoralized. So the first question was how to, bring people's spirits up. And then once we got through that, then we were able to get through these other practical ways. But, you can be sorry for yourself, but only not very long, because there's just too much to be done and there's too much to be shared, and you can really, I don't want to be a Pollyanna type person, but seriously, you're the only one who can pull yourself up and pull everybody up with you. So you might as well just get started, because if you stay down in that hole, it's just going to get deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you did that, and very well.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you.
And I would like to present Byron Schenkman. Byron, you are an extraordinary performer as well as an extraordinary leader. You've been called a superb harpsichordist by Seattle Times. You perform on piano, harpsichord, and fortepiano. Yeah, you really stand out as an extraordinary performer and leader of early music. You're a founding member of several ensembles, including Seattle Baroque Orchestra and Byron Schenkman and Friends. As a performer and as a leader, are there challenges that you find in combining these two roles? They're very different, can be, as David pointed out.
Yeah, I was going to say it's really similar to what David was describing. Definitely different hats and different takes a different part of the personality to be the entrepreneur, the big picture person versus being the person who has to perform on their own instrument and do their own piece of the puzzle. I remember when I was starting out as a performer, I would sometimes be really offended by presenters and administrators who would come backstage after the concert and say, well, it was a good concert. We had 372 people. And I was like, wait a minute, what about how wonderfully I played? After running some organizations myself, I totally get it. And now I know that that Margie Crosby, who's the executive director of Byron Schenkman and Friends, she doesn't hear how we play. She's there checking out the audience, making sure that everybody has what they need, seeing if there are people that she needs to make sure to, introduce this person to that person or whatever. So it's a very different kind of brain, and it's hard to do both. And I think it's really important when we have to do both, which a lot of us do in early music, because a lot of us are sort of creating our own ensembles or series, doing our own things. I think we have to create some boundaries. And like when I started Byron Schenkman and Friends, I didn't have a staff or a board or anything like that. I was just putting on the concerts myself. And something I'm really glad I did is I hired a friend to just be there at the concerts to deal with stuff that needed to happen at the concert, so that I could just be backstage thinking about the performance at hand. It's definitely easier to perform when somebody else is taking charge of things than when we're trying to worry about everything, when all the other musicians are coming to me to ask me, where a different kind of cello chair is or something like that. Then it's hard for me to focus on what I have to play.
Yeah, you're pointing out something that is so important to other artists starting up their own organizations too. And I'd like to ask, so how were you able to grow your organization then, from feeling that you were the only person there, the only person in charge? You said you maybe you could speak a little bit more about that process, how you shared the responsibility with a friend to start, and would love to hear more. It's very important.
Yeah, I think it starts with a vision of what we want to do, and then we figure out how to make it happen, right? And as far as growing it, well, one thing I did with this particular series, and I wasn't starting from scratch, as a like newly out of school. I had been performing in the community for a long time and had a donor base from other projects that I'd worked on. So what I did is I set out to raise the money to do the first season before we even had the first concert, so that we'd be sort of front loaded, so that we'd know that we already had the money to pay the musicians and to pay the hall and to pay the graphic designer and everybody who has to be paid before we started. And then whatever ticket revenue and donation money came in after we started having concerts would move us forward to future seasons. I guess if I had to do it that over, I probably would have raised more money than I did and included money for staff, because I think it really, where we are even now, in our 9th season, we pay our musicians really well, I think, but we don't have a very big budget for staff. And that is not sustainable. And it also ends up being an equity issue, because we, like last year, we were looking to hire an assistant, a part-time assistant, and the amount of money that we could offer for that, and the amount of money that we're paying our executive director, was little enough that the only people who could afford to take a job like that were people who had other sources of income. And so that tends to translate to people who are wealthy white people. So yes, Catherine, please speak up.
Is it possible to join with another group and to share an administrator? Because we were able to do that in the beginning with our company. I think we had actually 3 dance companies, no, 2 dance companies and 1 music company, and we shared an administrator between the 3 of us, which was enough to give her, a modest full-time position.
Yeah, I think it's a great solution.
Yeah, no, that is great. And thank you for sharing your progress, Byron. That is it's fascinating to hear. Yeah, and Catherine, I think you were right on cue, because I would like to open the floor up and ask questions to all our panel to get a conversation going. And I would like to start by asking you what kind of work you would like to see more of in early music. Catherine, maybe you would like to start.
I anticipated that question, and I was looking at David McCormick's one-act mystery play. And it reminded me of plays that I've done in the past too, which is you sort of create this context within which the regular audience can understand or participate in what it is that you're presenting. And we did this with the Pleasures of the Quarrel in this production that we just did last Sunday at Cornell, which was a collaboration. And I think that this idea of being able to collaborate, maybe beyond the early music scene, I mean, with institutions, and somehow present what it is that we love within a contemporary context. Not that we have to sacrifice our historical performance practice, but that we somehow have like a play or a frame around it of talking that sort of like sets it up. It sets up what's exciting about it and what you want the audience to hear, what you want them to understand, but not in an academic way. And I find that, putting together a play is a wonderful way of creating a context. And for dance, I mean, dance always has to have a context, because uh, most of the dance from the 18th century appears within a play or within an opera. So when you really want to see that expressive dancing, you have to connect it to what the purpose is. And there are a few ballets, for instance, Les Petits Riens, you could do that, but it's not like the ballets of the 19th century where the entire, evening is taken over by pantomime and by dance. I mean, traditionally, dance has been within that context of an opera or a play. So I think that that's one way of answering that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, collaborations are a really great way to sort of keep things interesting on stage. That murder mystery performance, I don't know that I would actually I don't know that I would do that show without the action, without the play. The music's good, but it's not familiar to audiences. It's a little bit of a pet project of mine. It's a composer, Pandolfi, that I was studying in grad school. And I got very interested, and there was a little footnote in some biography that he had killed someone. I won't say who, in case someone comes to the murder mystery show that's coming up. But I just got really fascinated by that. And I thought, what, and of course, my advisor said, just forget about that piece of knowledge that it has nothing to do with your paper. You can put that as a footnote in your paper, but it's not the main story. The story is the style of the snuff. Yeah. So I put it in a footnote, forgot about it for a few years, and then realized that I could create some context for it. And it's really fun. It's a great way to get people interested in some weird 17th century rep that they probably wouldn't know otherwise. And Alkemie has done cool things like that too. I give a lot of credit to Tracy Cowart, who thought of this wonderful program that was multi-sensory. We sent out these 5 cards to audience members. This was during the pandemic, so they're watching it online. And if their mail came, which was a huge problem during the pandemic, but for those people, if their mail actually came, they could go through the 5 cards and smell and touch and feel all these different cards. I think there are lots of ways to engage audiences like that. And for me, the other piece of this is just expanding the canon and introducing people to new pieces. And what I'm really learning is it's okay to do what classical orchestras do, like playing that same Mozart symphony a bunch of times, to give new rep a bunch of different readings over a series of years so that audiences start to become familiar with new rep and it doesn't feel new to them in a few years. I've been playing the Monticello fiddle music kind of ad nauseum for 2 years. And now my audiences know the tune Money Musk really well, and are eager to hear it. They're not upset that they've heard it for the 10th time, I don't think.
That is great. Byron, I know you've introduced old pieces of music a lot to your audiences as well. Do you agree with what David is saying here?
Yeah, I'm excited about that. That's a new idea to me, David, and a great idea. I program a lot of music by Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, who's a pet composer of mine. But I always program different pieces. And that's just such a great idea to just pick a few pieces and keep bringing them back so that they start to become familiar the way Beethoven's Spring Sonata or Fifth Brandenburg Concerto or something like that. You're gonna hear Fifth Brandenburg Concerto every few years if you go to Baroque orchestra concerts. You're gonna hear so I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I think the things that are most important to me are well, 2 things. One, do new things. I think that some of the real people I think of as pioneers in early music, I was thinking of Wanda Landowska or Thomas Binkley. They did things that nobody else was doing, nobody else had done. They did it their own way. They took chances. Some things worked amazingly, some things maybe not so much, but it was always something new. And I think that's one of the great one of the great things, one of the things that was really appealing to me about early music when I was a kid, when I was a student, when I was starting out, was this kind of counterculture innovation. And over the years, what happens is people start imitating what their teachers did and what their teachers' teachers did. And before long, doing a Castello sonata is not actually any more interesting than doing a Brahms sonata. In both cases, it's great music. You could do a great performance of it. You could do it different ways, but it's not new in and of itself. I remember when I was a young student in conservatory, I went to a masterclass by Andrea von Rahm, and she said something that has stuck with me ever since. She said, if you do something and it's successful, do something else. And I also really love that because and it's worked well for me. And my experience is that sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I do something new and it's yeah, okay, that one wasn't such a good idea. But I'd rather take those chances and have those moments of doing things that really are new and fresh. The other thing, I said there were 2 things. The other thing that feels even more important to me is to be conscious of what voices are we lifting up, what voices are we ignoring. Are we just perpetuating, are we just adding one more white male superhero to the canon? are we reinforcing societal structures that are not the societal structures that we really want to reinforce, but just that we're so conditioned to perpetuating? Or are we doing something that actually makes people experience art and life in a different way?
Mm.
And I think,
Yeah.
both David and Catherine just gave really good examples of ways that they have done that sort of thing. I think what David was talking about of actual collaboration is really important, that it's not just, okay, we're going to do our concert of Mozart and Haydn string quartets, and we're going to put in one by Joseph Bologna because that way we had a Black composer, check, done. But it's like, what if we turn it around and look at it from a different perspective that isn't the perspective that we started out with?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and you've really done a lot of work sharing new music with your audiences, and during the last 2 years, especially the past year, right? You have shared your music openly on YouTube. Do you think that will stay? How have are there other ways that the pandemic has informed how you run your organization?
Well, there are ways that it's been really helpful, because we were doing a lot of soul searching about issues of like, who are we reaching and how and why and what are we giving them? And this has opened up different possibilities for us that we hadn't explored before. So we decided early on that our online concerts would be free. There would not be access codes and, Byzantine routes that people have to go through to get to them, that they're just there, people can watch them. Luckily, people have been generous with donations. And we've decided that going forward, at least for next season, our plan is to have 4 live concerts and 3 online concerts. So we'll alternate months. I haven't had good experiences with live streaming personally. I feel like if I'm going to have somebody sit and stare at a screen, I want it to be a little more produced than that, and really work to make something that hopefully feels welcoming and draws people into a story. And for me, sitting, I see the advantages of doing live streaming. For me, sitting and watching a film of a concert hall where I'm not just makes me feel like not included. And for me, community building is the most important thing about putting on concerts. It's about making people feel like they belong to something, that they're part of a community, that they're included. So I try and we try, and luckily I have a really good team that I work with, and we're all trying to make the filmed concerts feel like a welcoming experience. And then we have the premieres where people can be engaged in the chat, and that's really fun. I really enjoy that, being able to, my concert is going on and I'm sitting there chatting with the audience at the same time. I like that.
Yeah, that's true. You get a chance to relive your concert together with the audience. That is really an unexpected byproduct of the pandemic. David, are there ways that the past 2 years have informed the way you lead your numerous organizations?
For sure. I've had a similar experience to Byron of trying to navigate the online thing, and I've had terrible live stream experiences. One of my first was a thing inside Monticello, which was really cool. We got to, like, Lauren Ludwig and I got to play inside Monticello, and they never let anybody play inside Monticello. And that was really nice, but and it looked like they had this very expensive setup going. We were very pleased with what they had done. And then I went back and listened to it, and it was horrifying. Just the worst audio I've ever heard. I think it was a Wi-Fi connectivity issue on their part, where it was just kind of in and out a little bit. And I broke an E string within the first 10 minutes of the live stream. And so I was changing a string in the middle of the thing, and Lauren had to play his solo at a different time. And we were all a little bit thrown by it. But I've also, like the Sacred Music of Monticello concert, we just did a live stream of that. There are things I would change, and now I can't. They're out there. But I wanted to. One of the things that happened is that people heard about my Monticello research who are not in Charlottesville and became very excited about it. There are history buffs that love this topic that are all over the country, all over the world, even. And I was really glad to build an audience around the country for that particular thing. And so being able to put this particular concert out into the world was really great. I'm about to do a semi-staged opera in Stanton, Virginia, and there's no way in the world that I'm live streaming that. We're going to make so many mistakes that we don't need the world to see, but our audience in Stanton can see. And yeah, but I personally feel like it's been a really great thing. I think a lot of our ensembles have seen some increased interest in what we're doing because more people are able to see it. And somebody the other day reminded me that there's an added bonus here forever, which is that folks who might have limited mobility or some other disability where they can't come to a concert hall, we've given them a way to attend concerts that didn't exist before. And I think that's really cool. And I hadn't really been thinking of it in those terms, but it's just yet another way that this is opening up doors and allowing greater participation in what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that is really wonderful. It is important to find silver linings in what has happened in the past 2 years. And you mentioned growing your audience over larger areas. And Catherine, your company already had a following in Europe and in Asia too, and you've been able to give them materials, classes, and events to participate in and take part of as well during this pandemic. Are there other ways that the pandemic has informed how you run your company?
Well, I kind of want to Byron mentioned something which was, live streaming. It can be very boring. And I think that I just want to mention that the Dallas Bach Society and also the Orchestra of New Spain went through the entire pandemic giving concerts. And so I was able to watch them evolve with the live stream. So the first live stream, yes, many problems, a little boring. But they did have a videographer by the name of Joseph Lowe, who is also a singer and a visual artist. And so, like, I guess 2 years later, we just did something with him, again, live streaming, and it was March 11th. And I thought, oh my God, I hope he finally got the focus on the dance right, because when we did our, during the pandemic, basketball court performance of dancers in Baroque masks and everybody, socially distanced, it was like, oh my God, he doesn't understand the symmetry. What's happening? And so I looked, and he has progressed so much in his live streaming. And he was having, like the full picture of the stage, and then he would sort of like, crossfade into the singer who was singing. Then it would be full stage, and you got the dancers coming on when they were supposed to. And you really had a better understanding of how to do a live stream that looked like it was edited. So I think that maybe what's coming out of the pandemic is having videographers who know how to really capture music, so it almost looks like a music video while they're live streaming. And the audience likes it because they're able to, make their comments and visit with their friends and, watch together. And then these concerts are not only live streamed, but they're recorded so that then they're also available for viewing later. And again, there's sort of like an international following that has developed over the pandemic because these things were available. And also because our dance company has an international following, we were able to kind of like bump up the, Dallas Bach Society uh, numbers in terms of audience and exposure. And as David was saying earlier, when we have these kinds of collaborations, and they could even be like across the sea or whatever, but it's these collaborative efforts that are then able to be seen either live streaming or recording, that is another community building thing. And I think, Julie, what happened for us is that for the first time in historical dance, we were really able to attend these workshops in other countries. And so it really brought the European and Asian community of early dance people, and Australian too, together in a way that we haven't been able to be together. And that part, I think, is going to continue. And there are going to be like more hybrid workshops where you can attend in person or you can attend online. I just think that we're finding, a much better way to use technology to bring our communities together across cultures and time zones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these live chats have been the lifeline, particularly when there were no live concerts at all. This was how we kept our audiences together with each other, together with us. And it's funny, I had I won't say who it was, but someone was really upset with me because they were trying to watch my concert and they hated the comments. And I said, you can just make it full screen and you won't see the comments. And she was like, oh, okay, fine. I'll do that. I think most people really enjoy it. And it's a great way to ask that question that you wouldn't otherwise ask, like in the middle of the piece, like as it's happening, hey, why is there really supposed to be a C sharp there, or whatever, whatever your question is, you can get an immediate answer from the artist who was performing. If it's played, after you've recorded it, it's not a live stream. But even if it's a live stream, you have somebody there to help the audience along. And it's been really great. And like Alkemie is still doing this, by the way. We're still doing premieres of our recordings. We're actually, the concert that we're doing this week, we're recording it on Friday, performing it live on Saturday. The recording will go out, I think, a month from now. And we'll all attend the live premiere. And people who buy the tickets to that will get to talk to us as it's happening. And that has been a cool new thing. I do want to say, we've talked a lot about how wonderful it is, but gosh, how wonderful is live performance, and how much have we finally have audiences realized how important it is to really experience it live. I think, I don't want to speak for all audiences, but I think most audience members are realizing just like the incredible value of that ticket, that it gives you, it moves you inside your body in a way that watching it on a computer or a TV screen never will.
There's something I want to say, just a plea to all of my colleagues about what David was just talking about with the live chat, is if you have live chat, make sure you have people in your organization who are interacting in the chat. Because I've gone to things where I like put it in my calendar to be at somebody's premiere because I thought, well, I should be there and show my support. And the first piece would end and I would write I would put in the chat, that was great, loved it. And there would be nothing. I'd get no response. And I'd be like, okay, well, I don't need to be here. Nobody's like, I can watch this later. I don't need, what's the point? So make sure if you're doing a premiere or you're doing a live streaming, that you have people there to engage with the audience chatting.
That's a great point, Byron. Are there other things that you've learned during the pandemic that you think will help your work in the future?
Definitely learn to be able to, I mean, as performers, we always have to know how to pivot really quickly, but I feel like we've honed those skills a lot in the last couple of years. And one thing that I noticed, we just had our first live concert of Byron Schenkman and Friends a couple of weeks ago. We were very conservative about when to start going back into the hall. And well, I'll just tell this story. The hall where we play required that we were allowed to be unmasked on stage, but anytime the stage manager opened the door, we had to remask. So if anybody was going off stage, everyone had to put their masks back on. And so there was all of this sort of choreography that we had not worked out of how to put on our masks. So we would get done with a piece and the audience would start clapping very enthusiastically. And then we would turn around, we would bow, and then we would turn around to get our masks and put them on. And as soon as we turned around to put our masks on, everyone would immediately just stop clapping.
Right.
It just stopped every time. And the thing that it made me realize is how much we have these these customs that have developed over generations of how people clap, how people bow, how people walk on and off stage, that we don't really need to do it that way. Like, we could do it other ways. And I feel like the pandemic has kind of stirred things up and given us a little bit of a blank slate and an opportunity to reset and think about how do we want to do performance and how do we want to interact with our audience.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Including the thing about the live chat, because, you know, I mean, this is just thinking out loud right now. We could have, we do Q&A after the concert, but there could be Q&A going on during the concert. You know, if somebody wanted to ask a question between the first movement and the second movement, that could happen. I don't know if I'd want it to happen, but maybe.
I've had it happen by accident in smaller, in smaller audiences. If I'm doing like a house
Mhm.
concert or something, someone will just, after the first piece will say, "Hey, what happened there? I want to have a question." I'm like, "Okay, I guess we're doing Q&A now." I mean, I like it, but it is hard to sort of set up the right expectations depending on the size of your audience.
Yeah, David, are there things that, what do you think will be most helpful in your future work as a leader of your organization, of what you have learned the past 2 years?
I'm struggling with this question a little bit.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to answer the question. I might pivot like 2 degrees. I was just, what Byron said kind of made me think about COVID protocols and how it's, it's the Wild West now. Every venue is different, every organization is different. And I'm finding it really helpful to just like to check in with artists as well. Like because I'm working with small groups for Early Music Access Project, and Alkemie is the same way. We check in with each other before the gig about what people's comfort levels are. So of course, we're accomplishing what we're required to do and meeting a certain level of expectation. But then kind of, like being realistic about like, all right, we're all eating meals together. So we have unmasked for that. Is it really necessary to mask in rehearsals? And there have been different answers depending on the gig and depending on the severity of the pandemic at the time. And because things are changing so much, I think it's really hard now to have these like super hard and fast rules in writing months and months before a gig. I have the advantage of being in a smaller organization. I think large organizations kind of have to put all this stuff in writing well ahead of time and be really rigid about it. But I think my larger point here is just kind of listening to musicians' needs, period, is something we've learned, that there are a lot of, we're all fragile to a certain extent, right? We all need the best possible scenarios to do our best work. And it's good as a musician, when I'm traveling to somebody else's gig, it's nice to feel welcomed and embraced and not stressed out.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, David, and so current. After being faced with 2 years of constant pivoting, of constant cancellations, last minute changes, all of that, I think that has made a lot of weaknesses in the gig system very apparent.
Yeah, I mean, this, back in January, February, where the bottom dropped out again, I know so many musicians who just weren't ready for that. And
no,
how would you be if your life is gigging? It's, usually bottom just drops out again. And we all thought that we might be past that point where the entire system would break down again. And gosh, I hope we don't experience that again, but I hope we're also building systems that are are kind of COVID proof.
Yeah, and you're
The
getting to
conversation
my next
that-
question. Oh, sorry, Byron.
The conversation that we've been having in the last couple of days is, so we have a COVID cancellation policy that if something is canceled for COVID, the musicians get paid 50% of the fee as a cancellation fee. And we had to do that last week. We had a trio program. One of the musicians woke up with a sore throat one day. They're, luckily tested negative for COVID, but in the meantime, we had to pivot and do a different program. And so, of course, the musicians who weren't able to play were paid the cancellation fee, which brought up the question. Right now, we have that in the contracts that if a concert is canceled due to COVID, that's the policy. But going forward, I really think there should be something like that for any illness, because for all the years that I've been a performer, I've performed so many times with a fever or with a cold, with a sore throat, with a cut on one of my fingers, and you power through, right? That's what we're conditioned to do, and it's really not. It's not sane. It's not healthy. And I was thinking about how in most professions, you get sick leave. If you're sick, you stay home and you still get paid. Whereas in our profession, if you're sick and you cancel, you could lose thousands of dollars of work. Yeah. And not only lose thousands of dollars of work, but risk that they're not going to hire you back because you were a problem. And I think we could take better care of each other. It means having more money in the budget. Just be prepared that, yes, we might have to pay an extra musician if somebody is not able to play that day. And I think that would be a great thing for us to strive for.
Yeah, I think dance companies might have been used to that because if someone's getting injured, you always have to be prepared to have plan B. And it has been our policy to, if someone is at rehearsal, they get paid for the rehearsals that they've done. And if they can't do the performance, then they're not, if they're not there that day, then they just don't get paid for that, but they get paid for everything that they did up to that point. And I think that this is probably maybe more common in the dance world.
I wish I could say that my experiences supported that, but that's the practice that you use, Catherine, and that is very important for the people who work for you. I
think if you'll let me chime in again, this sort of anticipates a question I know you were going to ask us later, but I think since we're on the topic, I think I want to just kind of go all the way there and just say, I think it's really important. I think we've all really learned that paying musicians well is really important. Providing good working environments is really important. Something that's come up recently, just in the last few months, I've had musicians talk to me about homestays. And there are folks who definitely just wish that whole practice would go away. There's some folks who really enjoy it. And I'm actually really struggling with this right now, because I don't know that I really have a budget to do away with homestays, but I really get it, especially I think singers who need to preserve their voice, having to have a forced interaction with a donor or a supporter of Early Music Access Project can be really a difficult thing, right? And it is in our world of Airbnbs, it's possible now to fairly affordably stick 4 musicians, for instance, in a nice large Airbnb with 4 separate bedrooms, that kind of thing. There are possibilities, and it's worth again sort of checking in with musicians and seeing what's possible and making room for that in our budgets as we try to grow. And certainly artists are more and more speaking up about these things. Folks are speaking up about discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault. People of color are speaking up about discrimination. Folks are speaking up about dress codes that are often really antiquated and are very much on a gender binary assumption. And I think that's a really important conversation. I know it's one that our IDEA task force is having, wanting to provide some resources for organizations who are looking to update the dress code. It's you know, and it's actually not that hard. You know, I've found it really easy to just, you know, tell my artists to dress nicely in black. They don't need any more instruction than that. They've been dressing up for concerts their whole lives.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And you're pointing out things that you and other arts leaders can do to improve the work conditions of artists. Do you think that applies to your work with the EMA too? That there are things that, as a national organization for early music, there are standards that, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I think the IDEA task force is taking a leadership role on this. I'm fairly certain they're working on a dress code sort of recommendation and some other things that will become public resources. And yeah, I think that as a national organization, we have to take leadership on this. We can't just be on the sidelines hoping that working conditions get better for early music artists.
I think that's a great thing to come out of Early Music America. How wonderful is that? So that you're really you know, helping to support, defend, and make a standard when there is no standard.
Yeah, and I understand, you know, our field is one of lots of scrappy groups, you know, who are small with small budgets. It's really hard to figure out some of these issues, and there's no like one size fits all. I think, you know, like the League of American Orchestras can make certain assumptions about the number of people or the budget involved, where they can make some pronouncements about exactly how a thing could be. It's a little harder in our fields. There are all sorts of different kinds of groups and different circumstances, but there are just some basic decency things that we can all be thinking about, that where people can get paid well and feel that they're valued for their work in all sorts of different ways.
And some of this is just, again, not taking for granted that we have to do things the way we've always done them because we've always done them that way. So, you know, there's been a culture of you know, billeting musicians in donors' houses. That's something that we've been done, you know, and we all have our stories, our horror stories and our good stories and our funny stories and our strange stories. But it's kind of like, well, I suffered when I was a kid, so you have to suffer when you're a kid. It's sort of, we don't have to do that. We can say, well, you know, I suffered when I was a kid. Maybe you don't have to suffer that much when you're a kid. Maybe we can call it out and say, you know, that's not really okay.
Yeah, and that's something that you as leaders have the power to do. Are there ways that artists can support you in this mission of making working conditions better?
They can speak up.
They can speak up. You encourage communication.
Yeah, and we can make places for people to speak up. And one thing that we've started doing is in our letters of agreement, we ask people, I forget what all of the things are, but we ask if they have any allergies, disabilities, sensitivities, or anything else that they would like us to know. We ask if they want these things to be confidential, you know, just give them a space that they can that they know that we want to know what might be an issue for them. Because I mean, like, speaking of disabilities, and chemical sensitivities and things like that, there's so many of those things that aren't going to be obvious to somebody, but can make the difference of whether somebody can actually function well or not. You know, if I'm housed with, I have some kind of intense chemical sensitivities, and if I'm housed with somebody who's wearing perfume, I'm not going to perform well. It's not going to be a good performance. But that's a really hard one to say when I'm hired for a gig, to say, can you make sure that the person where you're housing me doesn't have perfume? Because if they have perfume, it's going to mess me up. You know, we need to make space for that sort of thing.
No, that's an excellent point. That it serves the presenter as well as the performer to have communication. Yeah, definitely. Yes,
and I would say also, just as since I'm here on behalf of a national organization, we also kind of want to know what's going on in the field and how we can be supportive of artists. You know, I'm not starting like a hotline for complaints about orchestras. That's not EMA's role, but I definitely do want to hear in general what's going on in the field and how, you know, what resources we can provide to organization members, for instance, to help them address some of these things that artists are facing. That's where EMA can be helpful.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that the attitude of the three of you will influence other leaders in the arts to do the same thing, because I think it's mutually beneficial for sure. And I received a question from a participant. What advice would you have given yourself 10 years ago? Let's see, Catherine, maybe you'd like to start?
Not to be so shy. You know, sometimes, and I think the way to do that is like to keep in mind that, you know, whatever you're doing as a leader is not about you, that it's about making things better for the community or for what you're in. So if you can get away from your own fears and shyness, and I mean, I continue to give myself that advice. Yeah.
It's good advice for sure. What about you, David?
My best piece of advice is to learn how to say no. Practice often. I'm still learning. Oh my gosh, I'm still learning. But because actually what I really am finding actually is that with each new rung in the ladder, I'm having to learn to say no to a new level of things. You know, so it's now like really easy for me to say no to like playing a wedding gig, right? Which 15 years ago, it was not easy for me to say no. I had to think about whether I had enough money that month or not. Now that's an obvious one. Like, obviously I don't have time to play for a wedding and I do not want to play my modern violin outdoors. That's an easy one. But then there are much harder questions like, do I want to play the St. John Passion with the Washington Bach Consort? The answer is usually yes, but maybe sometimes it has to be no. Just to make sure that that everything that I do is of the quality that I want it to be. And it's a perpetual issue when you're at a certain place and people are, you know, asking you to do a lot of things. It's easy to feel excited by being asked to do all those things, but then you start doing things poorly. And that's no good.
That is also excellent advice.
Yeah.
Byron, what would you have told yourself about 10 years ago? Any particular?
I think it's similar to Catherine's, and it's an ongoing work in progress. It's the idea that the awareness that there's something bigger than me, there's something bigger than all of us. We're all here just to be of service. Trust that what I have to contribute is enough, and that what other people have to contribute is enough, and that I can let other people help. I can let other people do their part. I don't have to control what everybody's doing. Yeah, it's keeping some humility and keeping a sense of humor about it.
Very well said.
And that things work out in ways that I could not orchestrate. You know, things just work out in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
That combination of confidence and humility is really hard to get right. But it's the only way. I'm convinced. I know that there are many people in our field who have the confidence and do not have the humility, and some of them are doing pretty all right.
And many have the humility and not the confidence.
Yeah, I think that exists too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Thank you for sharing those great pieces of advice. I also got another question ahead of time here before I open it up to anyone in the room. what can early music teach us about today's contemporary society and art? Is there anyone who feels eager to take that one to start?
I have something to say about that. I think that now I'm getting tongue-tied on it. I started out with the confidence and then I lost. Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit. Maybe it'll come back to you. Okay. So I think the way early music and dance can teach us something about contemporary art is that there's something about that there's something classic, there's something that is iconic about certain forms in music and in dance. And when we see how that is used in the 18th century and we understand like the how it's put together or the aesthetic behind it, then I think what it can teach contemporary art is that if you can somehow, focus into what is everlasting, what is classical, and how do you reiterate that in a contemporary way, so that you just don't make, so that your contemporary art has a tie to the past, not that it's like nodding that way, but that it's coming out with this common root. It's a human root that joins us all in time and space. And it has to do with, as I always say, beauty, memory, and unity. It reminds you of that sort of unity from the past, or that not measured time, but timelessness. And there is a way to admire that in past work and then to find that new voice in contemporary art.
That is fascinating.
I think what I want to say is that certainly in performance, everything we do is contemporary and is borrowing on elements of the past. And that's true whether or not we're early musicians. It's true if you're a pop musician or a jazz musician or anything. You're always drawing on work from the past and making it into something new. And I think we have an opportunity in whatever our area of specialization is, or the area of specialization we're working in at a given moment, to make choices about what are we going to keep from the past and what are we going to discard. And as I was saying before, what voices are we going to lift up? What voices are we going to shut down? So I think that, I grew up with the idea that Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Schubert, that's just the best music that ever happened. And that's, objective fact. And then over the last 30 years, I've explored more and more layers of all of the assumptions that went into that, and all of the prejudices, and all of the ways that operating on that assumption perpetuates things that I don't want to perpetuate. So now if I'm going to play, say, Mozart, because I love Mozart, and I love playing Mozart, I need to be conscious of that. And what am I doing with it? How am I bringing that into our world?
I would just briefly say that, history repeats itself. And so, like, for instance, Alkemie is doing this program this week called Singing Truth to Power. And it's all medieval music. And every last piece has some resonance with what's going on today. We actually paused today before one of the pieces we played and just like thought about the situation in Ukraine, because the text was really sort of reflective of what's going on there. And that's one of the ways that the music that we play just sort of transcends these boundaries of time. And in a related way, the work that I am doing in Monticello is just bringing stories out to the fore that shouldn't have been lost to time. It's they're important, especially to the local history where I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. Everybody should know who the Scott and Hemmings family fiddlers were. They were super important to the culture at the time, and it's just really gratifying to be able to bring that history to now and kind of right a wrong, but in doing so.
Yeah, no, great. I wanted to open it up to anyone in the room who feels inclined to ask a question to these great panelists. Otherwise, I can always think of more questions. There's so many things to learn from. But yeah, feel free to post in the chat. There's a comment here that is I'd like to share and see if you agree with. It's Christopher who says, a mistake heard live is the privilege of the concert goer. And it's true. I mean, we have all these perfect recordings, and in dance they exist too, in terms of music videos, highly edited sound. How do we think about that?
I love a good mistake in concert. It really, to me, you know, I don't want to hear just a concert of mistakes, but the occasional mistake just reminds you that that the concert you're hearing is real and there are humans participating. And sometimes mistakes don't come out as mistakes at all. I've often listened back to my own performances and gone, oh, well, I didn't at all mean to do that, but that was kind of cool. You can call it an ornament. But yeah, there's something that can't be replaced, especially by the recordings where you can have multiple takes, where you can curate your ornaments.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
I love performers and performances that take a lot of chances and that are unpredictable. And if you're gonna take chances and be unpredictable, you're gonna make mistakes. And so an exciting live performance ought to have mistakes, because otherwise you're being too careful. That said, I don't want to hear those mistakes over and over and over and over and over and over. So, if I'm going to create a recording, whether it's an audio recording or a filmed concert, I don't want to leave in really obvious mistakes. I want to be able to edit those out.
For us, I think that when we make a mistake in a dance, it's an opportunity for improvisation. And the best thing is when all the other dancers, if it's a group thing, that they see what's happened and then they're just able to turn it over to something that's beautiful or fun or exciting. So it's really, for us, not so much a mistake that one person makes. It's sort of a mistake that they make, and then it's the group that makes it something else.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to share in the chat here, Thomas Carroll, who I think we all know. He says, as performers, we're all expected to lead by example, and the changes we enact going forward can inspire younger musicians, dancers, and creators. But at an institutional level, have you seen changes in how the educational system has begun or ignored to incorporate changes in how they train their performers, not to be fully engaged, not just in the canon, but in the road less traveled?
Well, I have very little contact with academic music making, so I can't really speak to that. I don't know whether either of you have.
I every once in a while work at Curtis, and I noticed that the focus for Curtis is to uh, really train their performers, not just to be wonderful performers, but how to interact with the community in order to make a place for themselves. And that they're very much interested in music as being a part of our society. And how do you and it's the performers that have to make that happen. And I do believe it's the practitioners that have to make the change happen, because other people, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it. So we have to do it.
I am seeing some evidence of this at a younger level. Like folks who are teaching Suzuki students are supplementing the usual repertoire with composers of color or women composers. Certainly in Charlottesville, that's happening. I'm seeing a lot of private teachers making that effort. I hope it's starting to happen at the collegiate level. I don't know. I am really kind of disconnected from that world at the moment. But yeah, I think it's really important. I mean,
I know that Paula Most, is that her name is?
Oh, yes.
She's
Yeah.
doing a lot of really amazing work around that, of getting examples into theory textbooks that are not all by white men.
Yeah, and that's so important. How, we've those music theory examples have been the same for so long, and it's high time that we gave students a few more examples in the first place, and to have them be women and people of color is a really wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're almost at time here, so I want to wrap up by a last question. I'd like to ask our panelists if there's been a particular project, your own or someone else's, in the last 2 years that have really stood out to you and inspired you.
Yes, I saw a film made by the Dallas Black Dance Theater, and it was during the pandemic and when nobody could really dance together or anywhere. So their whole film was outside. And what they did was they had some parts of it in the Arboretum, some parts of it in a parking lot that everybody knew, some parts by, White Rock Lake. And the music was actually was traditional music. It wasn't contemporary music, and they're like a modern dance company. And what they did was they sort of brought this sense of like folk tradition, and then places in Dallas that we all love. And they created a sense of community by being able to offer really beautiful choreography and sort of heartfelt dancing, using the elements. I mean, we felt the water, we felt the boat on the water, we felt the sense that that the petals were dropping. And it was so sensual, or I don't know, calling to the senses, even though we weren't there. And it was just performed and it was filmed beautifully. And I'm thinking that something like this, coming out from a group, would be a community building tool. I mean, not only is it beautiful and as an art, but it makes everybody, no matter what you do in the community, look at what's going on, look and treasure that. And parts of it were shown on the local news because it was so beautiful, and it just filled a place in the soul that needed attention.
Yeah, it sounds like it really could resonate within a community. Yeah. Byron, did you have a project, or did you see something, experience something in
The thing that was most inspiring and sort of mystical for me of things that I did was a collaboration I did with co-Salish flutist and storyteller Paul Chiokten Wagner. They had come up with an idea of a program juxtaposing early 17th century European music, so music from around the time of the Mayflower, with some kind of indigenous music and storytelling to acknowledge that there was other culture happening. It wasn't the way I think many of us grew up learning about it, that there was culture in Europe and not in America, and then the Pilgrims brought culture to America. And the thing that was amazing about working with Paul is that he was coming from a completely different worldview, background, way of approaching music. And it was so far from what I do that I had the grace to be able to just let him lead and just do whatever he told me to do. And so if he handed me a drum and said, "This is what I want you to do," then I did what he said. And if he said that, yeah, that sounds right, I trusted him. If he said, "Okay, let's improvise something, here's what I want you to do," I just followed his instructions and listened to him and really let him lead and let him do, I didn't dictate at all to him what he was going to do. I let him dictate what I was going to do, and what came out was not like anything else I'd ever done. And So I'm really grateful for that.
Wow, what an experience. Yeah.
That
And David.
that sense of vulnerability is maybe like another key ingredient to a great leader. Is being able to put yourself in that vulnerable position and try really risky things, things you wouldn't otherwise do. I mean, you know, I've been made to play triangle in Alkemie, which is gives me, you know, heart palpitations every time I have to do it. But it's just like, you know, those kinds of things make you a better artist. I guess I will share my experience briefly, which is that just watching what Deborah Nagy has done over the last 2 years is really inspiring. Her Salinera series and now her concerts that are online. I think some are in person as well. The videography, the sound has all been so rich and wonderful, and the content has been really educational and has really reached across boundaries. I feel like there's so many people watching that series, and we've all gotten a little bit addicted to it and and wanting to see what the latest thing is that Deborah is going to uncover for us in the early music world. And she's a great example of someone who's encouraging us to expand the canon, to think about a bunch of different things in the early music world and these collaborations outside of the early music world to enrich the experience. So I am biased. She was one of my teachers at Case Western, but she's still pretty much the greatest.
What a fantastic note to end the evening on. I'm so grateful for you all to join me. And thank you to everyone who participated, sending in questions and who came. Yeah, I think that's a very nice finishing note. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
for
Thank you,
thanks for
EMA.
hosting us.
organizing the whole thing.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.